Greetings and salutations. My name is Mark Vanderpool, and you're listening to Hyperion Midnight. Welcome to the Radical Philosophical Origins of Frankenstein, Part 3, Atheism, Anarchism, and Veganism. Oh my! In this episode, we will delve into the philosophical idealism, radical social reform ideas, informal patronage, and deep personal ties that linked two luminaries of the late 18th and early 19th centuries, William Godwin and Percy Bysshe Shelley. We'll see what provoked this great friendship, along with the passionate conflicts that threatened to tear it apart. First, though, we'll consider the senior of the two, Godwin, the father figure, as a powerful but impoverished public intellectual who lived during interesting times, did groundbreaking work, and needed patrons. A philosopher out there in the world on his own. Kinda, needing a dime once in a while. Part 3, Chapter 1, Kakajin! Holy crap, man! Send Mary to Scotland. William Godwin was a radical, anarchist, social philosopher, and an author of considerable reputation. He was also the proud father of the second Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin, the brainiac girl named after her mother, who would grow up to become Mary Shelley. You'll likely know her best as the celebrated author of Frankenstein. But you're about to get, what did Paul Harvey used to say? The rest of the story. Though a loving and attentive father, Godwin would make the tough decision in 1812 to send away his prodigal child. Mary would go for a while to live with the Baxters, a family of friends and admirers of Godwin's who lived in Dundee, Scotland. William Baxter had written to Godwin in admiration and asked if there was anything he could do for the esteemed philosopher. Godwin answered, saying some early 19th century variation of, "Sure, could you please take in my daughter for an extended visit? LOL. She's hardly any trouble at all, but things have been extra spicy around here, and I need a release valve, man. Her vacay would be my vacay, do you feel me? The wife is crazy, and the two of them stay right up in each other's hair all the time." And the Baxters said yes. Can you believe that? Bill Baxter wrote back and said something in Scottish, of course, like, "Aye, pack her lovely bags. Call the coachman and send her on, lad. We've got lots of room. Send forth ye bonny lass to yon Casa de la Baxter, because we Scots is real cool." And they were, right? This family was super cool. They said, yes, send her on, we'll take her in. Now, perhaps it's because the anarchist social philosopher William Godwin was the Baxters' personal hero among a small array of intellectual demigods for the time, and it might entail the times being different than they are now. Can we all agree that the times and social norms were probably way different? It seems peculiar to me that the acquaintanceship between the two families didn't run all that deep. From my perspective, both things seem weird. That Godwin would ask a personal favor of this magnitude in response to a polite letter, and that Baxter wouldn't find some very polite way to decline. But, people trusted each other. People in certain tiers, in certain circles of society, extended a lot of trust during those days. Godwin attributed the arrangement he'd made to a desirable change for Mary's health. Dundee and London aren't all that different in climate, so it likely had more to do with emotional and mental health than anything else. Tensions in the household had escalated, caused in part by Mary's stepmother, Mary Jane Claremont, a temperamental woman by all accounts, rumored to have a penchant for things like rearranging all the furniture every time Godwin left the house. Neighborhood gossip said that Godwin's household had become a battleground. Mary and her stepmother, Godwin's second wife, remained at odds with one another. The older lady's quirks about the furniture were far from the only thing the younger lady found disagreeable, and to be fair, a precocious teenager with a rapier wit and fluency in many languages could have been a gigantic pain in the ass. It isn't too hard to imagine Mary Shelley saying something vile in Latin and passing it off as a compliment to her stepmother. She was the original goth girl, after all, long before Wednesday Addams came along and made it cool. Endless bickering between the two women had taken its toll, leaving the whole family feeling ill at ease, and the daughter in particular needing a change of scenery, a different vibe, man. So Godwin decided that sending Mary to live with the Baxters would be best, and off to Scotland she went. The Baxters, genuine fans and true admirers of Godwin and his work, welcomed Mary into their home with open arms. Mary wrote letters to her father expressing her gratitude for the opportunity to stay with the Baxters and recounting the ways in which she felt the experience was shaping her. She wrote about the beauty of the Scottish countryside and the rich culture. The Baxters provided Mary with a strong sense of safety and security, and that allowed her to grow and develop. If you recall that open question from our Wollstonecraft episode, part 1 of this series, about what you could possibly need beyond the boundaries of your father's esteemed household for the unfoldment of your mind as young Mary Shelley, this was what she needed. As a middle teenager, about 15 years old, she needed some distance from the stepmother. Can you imagine it? And the full experience of a family that was a little more normal and was loving and close and not contentious with one another. During her time in Scotland, Mary delved deeper into both literature and nature. She developed a profound appreciation for both. She also explored the Scottish countryside, admiring the rugged landscapes and getting to know the local culture and the people. The Baxters were excellent hosts, introducing her to new books and encouraging to journal and express herself and develop her own thoughts and ideas. This period of Mary Shelley's life was crucial for her development as a person and as an author. Living with the Baxters allowed her to escape the tensions of her previous household and experience a little freedom. It also allowed Mary to develop a deeper appreciation for so many tributaries that would find their way thematically, developmentally into her stories. And with the Baxters, she found herself in a household where something as trifling as rearranging the furniture might happen, but it would never become a battleground issue. According to most accounts, the Baxters were such a loving, kind, and close-knit family that, although not mired in poverty and different in that regard, they likely foreshadow in many ways Mary's creation and framing of the de Lacy family, also known as the Cottagers in Frankenstein. The people who showed the creature what a happy family could be. Chapter 3, Part 2, Godwin and Shelley, an introduction. In considering William Godwin in relationship to his admirers, patrons, and disciples, we come next to the most abiding and complex relationship of the sort between two of the most influential figures of the late 18th and early 19th centuries, William Godwin and Percy Bysshe Shelley. These two men were not just literary figures, but also political radicals, philosophers, and friends. Spoiler alert, Godwin would not need to ask Percy, "Can you please take my daughter off my hands for a little while?" Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. The loquacious young aristo would pull a snake move and make off with her in a carriage late one night without any prompting. Philosophical idealism and patronage. William Godwin and Percy Bysshe Shelley were both idealists, men who believed in the power of reason and the perfectibility of human nature. Godwin, from a staunch Calvinist background, a man who had in his youth taken aim at the life of a preacher, became instead a completely secular philosopher and writer instead. He is considered one of the first modern anarchists. We might even call him the father of philosophical anarchism. Godwin thought that by education and perfection of character, and not by force or coercion, people could transcend the need for governance. He saw all existing systems as an inherent degradation. His work, Political Justice, published in 1793, Inquiry Concerning Political Justice, advocated for the abolition of government and the establishment of a society based on voluntary cooperation and mutual aid. Shelley, the great Romantic poet, essayist, and sometimes pamphleteer, was also a political radical and believed in the ideal of a utopian society, though born into wealth and with an arm's reach of an easier life if he could only please his father, dreary old Sir Timothy. Percy could not. He sought out his intellectual heroes instead, and likely saw in Godwin something of a father figure. Part 3, Chapter 3. Points of alignment between Godwin and Shelley that few people know. Number 1. Few people realize that both William Godwin and Percy Bysshe Shelley, in their evolving political ideologies, were heavily influenced by the French Revolution and subsequent social upheaval, including the question of whether monarchy would ever be overthrown in merry old England. And along with that, the shared ideal of a utopian society and the sense of how the revolution in France had fallen short in some regards. They both advocated for political reform, the rights of the poor, and the abolition of government. Point 2. Another interesting intersection between the two men is their shared interest in education. Godwin, a teacher and educational theorist, believed in the power of reason and the importance of education in shaping society. Shelley, too, believed in the power of education and the importance of knowledge in achieving a utopian future. Point 3. Although Godwin and Shelley had different views on religion, they both believed in the importance of free will and individual liberty. Godwin had shed his joyless Calvinist upbringing, becoming instead an atheist who opposed organized religion. Shelley was expelled from Oxford for a pamphlet he authored on the necessity of atheism, as he put it, but went on to express in his poetic raptures a point of view more closely aligned with pantheism. Pantheism is the belief that God is synonymous with the universe and that everything is a part of God, effectively making God another name for nature. Both atheism and pantheism were, of course, outlier points of view, signaling the radical departures of both men from the social trappings of organized religion. The god of classical theism sometimes just being a sublimation of the idea of a monarch. Point 4. Another fascinating intersection between the two men was their interest in the sciences. Godwin was particularly interested in botany and geology, while Shelley preferred chemistry and physics over the formal studies in Latin which had consumed and oppressed him as a schoolboy at Eton, and which were so easy by now as to bore him. He preferred the sciences instead. There were sparks and electricity over in the sciences. There was thinking that was new. Godwin's interest in botany and geology are evident in his book, Inquiry Concerning Political Justice, where he wrote about the natural world and its relation to society. Similarly, Shelley's interest in chemistry and physics is evident in his poem Mont Blanc, where he wrote about the power of science to uncover the secrets of the natural world. Both men believed that the sciences were a powerful tool for understanding the world and making it a better place. And point 5. Lastly, few people realize that Godwin and Shelley both held a deep interest in the rights of animals. Godwin advocated for animal rights in his work, while Shelley was a vegan and believed that animals had the same moral rights as humans. The word veganism not yet having been coined, Shelley's moral and ideological veganism was sometimes referred to as his Pythagoreanism. This interest in animal rights was reflected in both men's writings and is a fascinating point of intersection. They were way ahead of their times. Part 3, Chapter 4, Personal Intersections. The two men first met in 1811, when Shelley was just 21 and Godwin was 49. At the time, Godwin was in dire need of financial support for his work, and Shelley, being from a wealthy background, offered to become his patron. This patronage was intended to allow Godwin to continue his writing and publishing of radical ideas with no institutional backing, while allowing Shelley unfettered access to new intellectual circles to which Godwin belonged. The arrangement was hindered somewhat by Shelley's limited and permission-based access to his family fortunes. And the permission, when he was only in his early 20s, was perhaps unsurprisingly mostly a big no. Again, dire Sir Timothy. Shared passions and conflicts of interest between Godwin and Shelley. It is fair to say that the bonds of admiration were mutual. Godwin was fascinated by Shelley's poetic genius and idealism, while Shelley fell like a moth into the flame of Godwin's philosophical ideas and radical points on politics. However, this high-level reciprocity of personal interest was not always smooth sailing. The most significant conflict in their relationship, taking first place over even Shelley's reversal on the financial backing that he had at first promised, was Shelley's fascination and subsequent elopement with Godwin's daughter, Mary Wollstonecraft Godwin II, named for her mother. Mary's imperious temperament and intellectual charms were all but irresistible to the young poet, who felt a reverence for the works of Mary Wollstonecraft, her departed mother, perhaps every bit as great as his respect for the tutelage under the radical political thinking of her father. The arrangement, however, was full of social peril. Percy was already married to a young woman named Harriet, a girl of 18 who was contemporaneously pregnant with his child. He couldn't move on without drawing scorn to the next attractive teenage girl who came along merely because of her intellectual pedigree. But when Mary got back from Dundee, Scotland, to once again reside in the home of her father, and the acolyte Percy Bysshe Shelley was coming around, their intersection was like fate. The pressures of damp and conservative English opinion inspired the young couple to depart in a hired coach at midnight, bound for the shore, and then to travel by boat to the European continent, taking their love and Mary's stepsister Claire with them in tow. Percy and Mary both kept scrupulous journals, including one combined or jointly written journal, capturing the narrative of their great intercontinental adventure. Can you imagine what that journaling would look like today? Percy's an idealistic and apparently limitless 21-year-old who has abandoned his young and pregnant wife for an even younger girl with extraordinary parentage. Mary is all of 16. She is fluent in multiple languages and intellectually runs circles around most adults. And yet she has allowed Shelley, the poet, to sweet-talk her stepsister Jane Claremont into coming along too. For a minute, Mary thought this was a good idea. Can you imagine what their tweets or Facebook updates would look like if this were all happening in the early 21st century? Peas macking on the stepsis again. Think I'm fixin' to kick him to sleep when this coach hits another bump. LOL, LOL. Feeling dismal. This unorthodox arrangement, to put it mildly, caused a rift between the two men, with Godwin feeling betrayed and resentful towards Shelley. He initially disowned Mary, who came home well pregnant, and refused to have any contact with her or Shelley. Eventually, after about 2 years, they reconciled and were able to maintain a benevolent if somewhat strained relationship. Shelley's elopement with Godwin's daughter added a layer of complexity to their already intricate relationship. I think that's fair to say. And by elopement, of course, we don't mean running off to get married, not right away, because Percy Shelley already was married to a lovely young thing named Harriet, who just didn't have that Godwin Wollstonecraft family zing going on. So it was tense stuff for a while and ripe material for scandal mongers. On the one hand, the remaining goodwill can be viewed as a sign of the strong bond and mutual admiration between Godwin and Shelley. On the other hand, it also caused a rift between the two men, as Godwin was initially opposed to the union and felt betrayed by Shelley's actions. And he was so furious with Mary that he really didn't speak to her for the next 2 years. Did I mention that when they returned she was pregnant? Penniless and pregnant. That's how they rolled into town. Yeah, it was tense. It's important to note that Godwin had financial struggles and was in need of a patron, and Shelley's interest in his daughter was a financial boon to him at first. That's the way he viewed it. In a letter to his friend William Roscoe, Godwin wrote, quote, "Percy Shelley is a young man of great generosity, and I have no doubt he will aid me in my financial difficulties." End quote. This expectation would lead to disappointment, as mentioned, as the youthful and optimistic poet lacked any real control of his family fortunes. However, Godwin's initial disappointment in the elopement didn't last long. As he came to understand and appreciate the depth of Shelley and Mary's love for each other, he saw it in a new light. In another letter to his friend William Roscoe, Godwin wrote, quote, "I have come to the conclusion that their love is a genuine one, and I wish them all the happiness in the world." Unquote. Godwin had become, if not more conservative, at least more pragmatic. He knew by middle age the high costs of being an outsider to good social standing and reputation. The disadvantages of living under an air of scandal would continue to shade, if not vex, Godwin's proud and undaunted daughter for nearly the rest of her life. They say necessity is the mother of invention. They rarely add that the inventions of fancy and foreboding can culminate in the birth of monsters. Godwin and Shelley's relationship, their utopian pursuits, and all the revolutionary world energies surrounding them serve as a reminder that true change doesn't come easy or happen overnight. Also that personal relationships and struggles are real, including the everyday financial woes, and this can have a profound impact on an individual's life, liberty, and creativity. Thank you for joining us on this journey of exploration, intersecting the lives and beliefs of great artists and thinkers. If you're finding value in this channel, I'll invite you to make a one-time donation in any amount through PayPal or to visit our online store. Links in the description, along with the usual actions of like, share, subscribe to help us reach a larger and equally appreciative audience. Coming next to Hyperion Midnight, Radical Philosophical Origins of Frankenstein Part 4. Percy Bysshe Shelley and the Devil. Don't miss it, man! Subscribe and stay tuned. Thank you for your kind attention and support. This is Mark Vanderpool signing off for Hyperion Midnight. Per aspera ad astra, and hail New Terra.